Okay. Last video was so great. I was so happy with so many of the discussions that were occurring in the comments, and like being able to share my thoughts and hear other people's perspectives is the whole reason I made this channel. So I was so excited with the comments from last video. So I love that. Thank you all so much. Okay. This video is going to be about this video is going to be about how I don't have an internal monologue. Now, I know this is fairly common, but I think that so many people... Rude? Why would you do that? Okay. So, I wanted to talk about how I don't have an internal monologue, and I feel like this is actually really common, but people don't know that it's common because they haven't ever thought about it before. So people who have internal monologues don't understand how somebody who doesn't have an internal monologue could possibly think, because they're so driven by themselves, talking to themselves in their brain. Which, like, so real. I totally get that. I don't get it because I relate to it or like I've experienced it, but I understand it because seeing it in films all the time, like, and it's like part of the reason that like the type of writing, like stream of consciousness writing, has become so popular is because so many people identify with how their brain works and that's what they think. I remember seeing that Ferris Bueller talking to the camera was kind of like how people who have internal monologues kind of talk to themselves, and I didn't really relate to that, which like is fine, but the way that my brain works, instead of using words to kind of bounce ideas around in my head, I'm just like constantly visualizing things. Like people who have internal monologues also visualize, but I think they just rely on it less. So for me, the most perfect and ideal form of writing is script writing, because it is so based in like drawing a picture and dialogue. When in writing, in like fiction or like just novels in general, it's kind of more of like kind of telling you what's occurring, and a lot of the time it's telling you what to draw on. When in script writing, you can kind of pull more and kind of make things up as you go along and come up with more ideas and fill in the blanks, which like is the way that those mediums work. Fiction doesn't exist for you to fill in the blank, so like why would they make room for that? That's totally fine. I know. I know. Bro. Anyway, and so I've heard in the past that like some people think that not having an internal monologue, like it makes you less mentally weak, which is not true, because I am very mentally weak. Okay, not actually. I have been very mentally weak. I have struggled with... Bro, I'm trying to be vulnerable. Okay. I've had my fair share of depression, anxiety, and other traumas. I can still feel all of these things. It's not always negative self-talk. It's negative self-attitude, and I can still feel all of the negative emotions. It's very just physical for me instead. So for a lot of people, when they're depressed, they talk about how they have trouble getting out of bed. They have trouble functioning, brushing their teeth, doing really like just basic human everyday stuff. And that's kind of the category that I fall in. I'm not like necessarily telling myself like, oh, I'm feeling so bad, oh, I'm a bad person, or like whatever. It's much more of like, I cannot do anything, and I can't find the motivation to do things because I'm struggling to think and like manage and acknowledge my emotions at all. And so like this is true for a lot of people who aren't taught to process their emotions in general. So like there's certain like overlaps for like the reasons that people struggle with different things. So like if a young boy is never taught how to deal with his anger, for example, he feels his anger extremely physically. He acts through his anger in order to stop himself from feeling so physically upset. Like his heart rate might jump up, he might get clammy hands, he might feel like a physical urge to hit something, for example. So people can still feel emotions and have thoughts without it being super based in thoughts and like what's going on cognitively. It can still occur like very physically, which is very common. So another thing that I've seen in the past is that people think that not having an internal monologue, like you can't read. I can read just fine. There are two options for me. One is just visualizing or imagining everything that I'm reading. The other, especially like when I'm reading really heady stuff and like I really need to chew on what I'm reading more, like if I'm reading nonfiction or like, like if I'm reading nonfiction or just something that's like kind of heady, I will force an internal monologue in my own head. So I'll be reading something and instead of just seeing it, I'll read it to myself in my brain and also see it if it's possible to, because sometimes you can't. One of the biggest problems for me is that a lot of the time I will be reading, I will be watching something, and my brain is showing me a whole bunch of other things at the same time because it's kind of filling in the blank the way that people's brains are meant to. So instead of thinking of things in my head audibly, I will see things and my brain will start going down kind of weird little rabbit holes. And it's pretty interesting because someone will say something and then I will have like 3 or 4 different routes that my brain could go down, and sometimes it picks more than one and is thinking about, like, I oftentimes will have multiple songs stuck in my head. It's kind of annoying, but it's kind of fun sometimes. I like to think about multiple things at once, but it's very distracting and I can't do it for very long. So I tend to keep it short, keep it brief, keep it short. And like, I don't know, like when I'm thinking about doing something like making this video, I'm thinking about what will I say? I will imagine myself sitting here in this spot in my room with my phone set up right here with my little tripod and my cat screaming at me, and I will basically practice talking to the camera because I'm not making my arguments or making my points in my head to myself. I'm making it in the visualization to my phone, if that makes sense. So it's just like watching little movies in my head, and you know what? That's not even it. It's like playing different video game levels as myself, and I'm the character that I'm playing. And it's just very unusual. It's very unusual, and I can see why people are kind of mind-boggled by it, because it is weird, and it doesn't really, it's not easy to explain, but I really am just making up words as I'm talking. I don't think about what I'm gonna say before I say it. It just comes out, and that's why this video format is so great for me, because I can literally just wing it and have fun with it, just say whatever comes to mind. And that works a lot for me because when I'm reading literature, when I'm hearing songs, when I'm reading poetry, whatever, anything that is a strain of sentences, I remember it really well in my head, because when it's different, when it's new, it makes me imagine something differently. So when I'm talking, I could go different routes while talking as well. So like when I'm talking, sometimes I'll jump forward to the end of a thought process, and sometimes it's harder for people to get it. Like, if I'm talking to my sister, she's like, where did you get that from that? Like, can we talk about that, please? And I'm like, yes. So I thought of this, then this, then this, then this, and that's how I got here. And sometimes it's more self-explanatory, but other times I really do have to figure out how to communicate with people. It's really difficult for me to sum up what's happening in my brain. A lot of it is just like random stuff that's just popping up. And like almost every time that I tell people like, oh, I don't have the internal monologue, so things are very visual for me in my brain. And they're like, oh, so when I say this word, will you think of this? And honestly, yeah, kind of. But it depends on the context in which you're saying it. Because if someone says, oh, well, if I say this disgusting word, will you think of it? And the answer is yes, but only in the context of the way you said it. So I will think of that person saying the disgusting thing, again in my head instead of actually seeing it, because like if it's gross, I don't want to think about it, so I'm not going to. I'm really sorry about my cat. I shouldn't have given him drugs. But yeah, I would really like to know what other people's thoughts on the lack of internal monologue are like, especially if you don't have an internal monologue yourself. I have a friend who also doesn't have one, but he was under the impression that people who don't have internal monologues struggle less with mental health, and I kind of was like, no, not really. For me, it's just really physical, and it sometimes actually makes it harder because my self-awareness is different from other people's. Because what you want in therapy is self-awareness and understanding of your own behavior and thought process. So when you don't know what your thought process is because it's not words, it complicates things. Anyway, yeah, would love to know your thoughts. I don't know, I'm still just in a really good mood about my last video. It's nice to hear other people's thought process. Okay, I can't talk anymore. I have to stop.